I was down in Ghent or Ghent or however you want to say it, yesterday at Configuration Management Camp, which is great. This is like I think the. Uh-oh, I'm gonna have to edit this now. Why is this broadcasting? Oh, I know what's happening. I'm gonna start over again.
Say,
Thank you.
Echo. It's like 20
I
seconds
reckon
lag.
you went to Ghent.
That's right. That's right. It'll be in the live stream. So if you watch this far, I'm gonna uninstall, and then I'll start out this. I have this thing that allows you to like manipulate where sound goes on your laptop. It's great. It's this thing called Sound Source, I think, from the great people at Rogue Amoeba. But ever since I've been using it, it's just a hassle. You know, like you're like, I need to get the wires that make things go places, and then you're just like, I don't know, I just want to have stuff go to my headphones. But that's what happened. Anyways, let me start over again. So I was down in Ghent, as us English-speaking people would say, yesterday for a configuration management camp. I think this is the third time that I've been there. It's always a fun, it's enjoyable. It's right after FOSDEM, and so there's a lot of people who go there from FOSDEM. And it is true to its name. It's somewhat of a niche topic, but in our world, it's a huge thing. It is about configuration and release management, essentially, and then the kind of things around that. So of course, there's lots of Kubernetes talk and stuff like that. But yesterday, the keynote was from Adam Jacob, of Chef fame, and he was finally giving a public view into like what his new company is called a System Initiative or something. And basically, I'll have to dig into this more. So this is just from seeing his talk, so who knows if it's accurate. But of course, as people who get interested and obsessed with a certain area, it's another configuration management, release management thing. And he went through the problems with infrastructure as code. One of the things that he and his buddies in that area pioneered, of course, and not buddies. There was quite a lot of animosity. I don't know if you remember between the Puppet and Chef people. That was, in retrospect, what are you going to do? But essentially, I think the main thing, the way that I, as an application developer, a Java developer who stopped coding in 2005, he was like, what if configuration management, but object oriented, right? And what that means is he would call them models. But he was basically like, and there's a fun twist to this at the end. But what if we had models, which I would call objects, and the model was like your web server, and the thing with that is there's a API or whatever, and you tell the web server to configure itself and install itself and set it up, and it's in charge of doing that. Instead of the way that we do this now is you tell it the exact settings to do. This is kind of like a Cloud Foundry way of thinking about stuff, right? In the same way that you would go to Cloud Foundry and be like, I don't know, run this application. I got to go eat something, right? And like Cloud Foundry, because it has strong opinions, runs it in the way that it runs it. In the same way you would have a database or a load balancer or presumably some router, and it has a model or an object, and it's in charge of figuring out how to configure and do itself. And then the fun part, or the fun part, is that part of what they're thinking of is then you would just basically, you can do bidirectional syncing of this model, of this object, back to staging and development. So like in staging and development, you build up this model that you want, a simulation, if you will, and then essentially what you say, it's kind of like a reconciliation thing in Kubernetes. You say like, now make production look like this model, right? And it kind of just synchronizes up that way. But the fun follow on from that is like, and then what you could also do is like, you could actually have a better single source of truth, which, as he pointed out, is always a lie. So it could be less of a lie that you have a good idea of what's in production, because production, these models will sync back to your development and staging thing. Or as we would say, you remember this phrase from the Internet of Things era, digital twins. You would basically have digital twins that are bidirectionally syncing, which like
I'm a twin.
Yeah.
I'm in digital-ish, therefore I am a digital twin. There you go.
So is that a viable model? Is it resilient for enterprises? Can you just swap those twins out? Does it work?
No, sadly we're not identical. I wish we were, because I could fudge all my exams, get him. He's in IT as well, so he could take half of them, I could take the other half. We combine our CVs. It'd be great, but no.
Yeah.
Sadly not. So we're not.
One of you wants to take some time off, you can just send the other one and be like,
yeah.
yes, last week I sent that out.
It'd be great, wouldn't it? I'd suddenly have a whole new skill set I could call on. It'd be far more interesting on these podcasts if every week I came on with a different set of knowledge and you never knew whether it was me or my brother.
That would be fun. That'd be a fun game we could play at the end. Which one is it? Exactly. Ed 1 or Ed 2?
But sadly, we're not identical, so it would be very obvious. I'm sure he's quicker and he's smarter than me. Anyway, I have to say, on that conference thing, I don't get that. I'm sure it's just the way they'd explain it or something, but the whole. So I'm like, so if it's just sort of almost object oriented, isn't that really what Pulumi is trying to do? Write in a code of your choice or language of your choice, make it more structured and everything. And the whole syncing things, well, again, shouldn't that be what infrastructure as code lets us do anyway? It feels like one of those. I'm sure there is something clever in there, and someone would explain it in more length and go, in this scenario, this would work.
Oh, totally.
But on the surface, I'm like, I feel like we should do all that with what we've got.
Right. And to that point, like, I think also, I mean, it all seemed cool to me, right? Like that seemed like a great approach. And then also, kind of to your point, it all comes down to the actual implementation, right? Like as, and then also, I don't know what they call this nowadays, but like, so the word drivers is what I would use for the following. It's like whether you're using like Puppet or Chef or like Kubernetes or whatever, I vaguely know what Pulumi is, or the system initiative thing, eventually there's some code that like connects to a Cisco router and configures it, right? And you're kind of like, that never gets better. Right? Like that only gets better. And Adam started off by looking at how you configure SendMail, right? And there's two ways it used to configure SendMail, and one of them looks horrendous, and the other one is less horrendous, right? It's just some nonsense from the Unix era, right? And it's like, if you were to manually type this stuff in, it's almost as bad as like the command line for like running the JVM. It's just like, I don't know what's going on here, right? Capital X, give up. And like, so like all of yeah, all of this fancy configuration stuff, as Adam also covered, is just sort of like, a nice UI and model on top of like some horrendous stuff underneath. So, but my point being that like, well, maybe it's better to hide the end user. This is a lot of what Kubernetes wants to do. Like, there's no reason for everyone to have to know this horrendous configuration. We should just let the experts do it, let alone going to the drivers thing, the actual manufacturers of the hardware and the software, right? So the Cisco people should make the drivers for how to configure stuff, which might conflict with their desire to sell you stuff to do it easily for you, which is whatever. That's on the business side. But I think this stuff always comes down to like, it has to be a good idea, which is why you spend the most time going over the idea. And then over multiple years, you have to build up a community or an ecosystem to unopen source it of people who have all these drivers, and it just works, which is cool. They should do that. It'd be great. It'd be fun. And then also, this is what always I think happens to me at Configuration Management Camp. It's like at a university, and they have like a university cafeteria with university quality food, which is great. So I was sitting there, and I ran into our old friend Colin Humphreys, who used to work here and at Cloud Credo. And then we spent like, me and his homies spent like 3 hours talking instead of attending the conference. So that it was fun to talk with him. He's
the best way to do things.
Yeah, he's a delightful person.
Cool, and
yeah.
And I do your lecture on here and there at uni or something, because you're just chatting, and actually it's more useful than the lectures.
Yeah. It was nice to catch up on stuff and understand what his company is up to. I actually need to see what his new startup. I need to see a demo of it before I fully connect the dots, because it made sense, but I need to see what's the proof in the pudding, as they say. And what I found out is that, fun fact about Colin, I think he is a diehard Cartesian. I think he kind of laid that out there at the end, and he's really into Descartes and the Cartesian system of existence. But then we were told that they were closing the cafeteria and we had to leave. And as someone joked as we were walking out the door, the staff heard someone talking about Descartes, and they were like, all right, it's over. You got to leave now.
And hey, I remember very recently, Colin was on the hunt for podcasts to listen to. Did you manage to secure his listenership so we can move up to
No. However, I did talk to several other people who I talked about all the podcasts, the Coté podcast universe too. So maybe we'll have some new listeners. That would be good. I'll have to tell him that, because I wanted to follow up on the opposite of Descartes in that era of philosophy is this guy Berkeley, who he had an extensive proof that we are all just an idea in the Western God's mind. There's actually, it's hard to know if there's actual physical reality, but we can know that we are a free-willed, independently operating, at least idea. So he was like right there, going towards like Buddhism and Hinduism, and then he's like, nope, I'm going to take the left turn. Just sort of veered off there, back to Europe. But I'll have to send some Berkeley to him, see what he makes of that. That'll be fun. Well, speaking of, see what you make of that. The CNCF, they released their most recent survey about the Kubernetes world, and it's always fun. We do a yearly survey. I was looking over the questions for our 2023 State of Kubernetes survey, which we'll probably publish, I'm guessing, if it's like last year, sometime in December. I don't know. It depends on what we do. But that's always fun to look at. But the CNCF survey, it had some interesting findings in it. Now, I think it's fair to say that the three of us, we didn't go to GitHub and download the raw data to do extensive analysis of it. We should load that up into GPT maybe and ask it to do it. But in just reading the survey...
We pay for that now, don't we?
Oh, well, I actually signed up for the Plus thing, and I would love to pay for it just to get new features.
I'll send you my requests.
That's right. But there's a few interesting things in there. I'll start with one, which I think is I don't know, the thing that I care the most about is basically my whole theory of how you improve during doing software. With the big double dagger footnote of like, this applies 90% of the time and there's exceptions, blah, blah, blah. Is that basically the way you improve software is to give developers to make their releases is weekly. Maybe daily is fine, but like that seems a little too much. But if you could do weekly releases, what that means as a software developer is that you can basically put a feedback loop in place to learn if the features, the changes you're making to the software are making things better or worse. And then every week you can course correct, as opposed to every month, every 3 months, every 6 months, every 12 months or whatever, right? And that's the way that you can rapidly improve your software. And then even find out what problems you're solving and verify that in the first place. So I'm always interested in how quickly something like a Kubernetes allows people to release software. And it looks like, to greatly summarize it, because the wording for this stuff, they do it a little weird in the CNCF survey, but people who have more applications in production on Kubernetes, they are able to get even closer to doing daily releases and weekly releases. And in fact, this is the weird wording that they use. Instead of just a direct percentage, they use these categories of if nearly all of your applications run on Kubernetes in production, you see basically like an almost 10% rise in the number of people who can release multiple times a day, which is like, releasing multiple times a day is a little nutty, but whatever. But it means that you can release more frequently. Now, maybe in the detailed stuff, hopefully they did define what nearly all means, and maybe in the details there's more precision there. But that's a positive finding that it actually helps people out. How about was there anything interesting in your skimming of this summary that the two of you liked? How about you, Ben?
Yeah, I did. I saw something around challenges. So they'd asked people responding to the survey, what are the biggest challenges that you report in both using and deploying containers and getting the most out of that new ecosystem around cloud native? And it seems that the most significant barrier that folks were reporting back was the ability to get the right training and have the right skills was number one. And number two was security and having confidence that the code that they're releasing, that they're running on the platform is secure and hasn't exposed them to some bad actor in some way. So I thought that was very interesting because they're two areas that we have in the Tanzu application platform that I work on that we really care about, is the idea of enabling folks to be able to, understand what it is they're doing with the platform. In the form of learning centers that you can write and you can use to basically take hands-on labs and learn more about the platform that you're using on a daily basis. And of course, security, which is something that the secure software supply chains is really important in allowing you to deliver a more sort of secure footing for all the containers that you run, making sure that they've all got an SBOM, that you know when they were last checked, and you know what dependencies they have and what vulnerabilities are in there. Just knowing is part of the answer. It's not just correcting any issues that you have, but just knowing that you have issues across what might be hundreds or thousands of containers is a big deal. So it was really interesting to see those two things picked out as the clear top challenges that folks are reporting back, because it echoes with what we hear from customers all the time.
Yeah, it's always good to validate your business. which no, and I think we see that in our own surveys, right? Like those are the top two things every year, and they trade places every now and then. But I think that is consistent. And like you're saying, we have Kube Academy, Kube.academy you can go to, and I think you can even do some courses without even registering. And then after that, you register. I think they're basically all free, if I remember, or maybe not basically, maybe specifically. I forget. That's how good of an employee I am. And
and to flip that on its head a little bit, is it also a signal that actually it's too complex? Like this ecosystem works, but it's very complex.
Yeah.
That might be resulting in folks feeling like they can't find people who've got the right skill sets. They don't have the right skill sets themselves. They struggle to keep up maybe with the pace, because we all know that the pace is absolutely crazy around the CNCF and all the different projects and the maturity levels and the speed that they iterate. So maybe it's also a signal that there's an underlying issue around just the sheer complexity of the whole thing. And if you try and if your approach to that complexity is to try and master it, maybe that is quite difficult actually, and maybe that's worth reconsidering whether or not you really need to be a master of all of it, or whether you can use some extra tools maybe to give you some higher level abstractions.
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. Like you're making me think that, like, analogously, like Kubernetes is in the era of when Linux was basically like you had to make your own distro as an end user. Like I wasn't a Linux person back then, but I imagine there was a point before I don't know, there were like 5 or 6 distros in the late 90s. And like, you could choose one of those distros, or you could assemble your own, and you'd have to make the choices to integrate it. And like, I bet there were similar surveys where they're like, whoa, these things are confusing. Probably sponsored by the incumbent operating system vendors. But, it was no doubt an equally like confusing thing at that point, until it all consolidated. And as our old friend Kubernetes Joe used to like to say, it became boring. And it was there were skills in there. You're also reminding me. I don't know if when y'all were growing up in your neck of the woods, you had the G.I. Joe cartoons, but they had these little educational moments every now and then. And the motto of the educational moment was "Knowing is half the battle," which I think you're going. Knowledge is power. I don't know what the other half is. Maybe guile or something. But
knowing the other half is the other half. Yeah, I've heard the phrase. I never knew where it came from, or whether they've in turn pinched it from somebody else.
Yeah.
So one of the things I saw, actually, in fact, I saw, like I prepped, I didn't. I'm looking at it right now. But it's an interesting one, and again in this survey, that it says, so I haven't seen quite how they define it, but the CNCF end users are more advanced in their adoption and use of Kubernetes, and are more likely to maintain a larger number of clusters, essentially. Which I find fascinating in that discussion we just had. So we're saying, there is undoubtedly a ton of complexity in there. But a bit of me would think, so the non-end users, I assume, are sort of vendors and consultancies and that kind of thing. You would like to think that they were leading this charge in lots of ways. And in terms of expertise, if they're saying this is really complex, we can help you, they would be the more advanced set. But this seems to be implying it's the opposite. that the end users, the people on the coalface, are the guys who know all this better and are using it more in production and so on, and everyone else is catching up. Which, I'm sure is not the case for us. But it's a fascinating. I'm curious what that data is, and what that means. I guess it just feels like anti-intuitive to me. I remember covering OpenStack, and it felt often like that was sort of vendor-led. Everyone was out there saying, "We've got all this stuff, we've got it all working. You need us to get it going because it's complex," and everyone else was sort of going, "Oh, let's have a look, let's do that." But this seems to be the other way around.
That's interesting. In the OpenStack world, which I remember well, it's probably because most of the people involved in that were looking to build their own public cloud. They were as people like to say, drinking their own champagne or eating their own dog food, and so there were practitioners there. Whereas I wonder if you looked at all of the vendors in the Kubernetes space, if they're striving to like run their own Kubernetes stuff. I don't know. That would be, and then I guess the other way you would run that is to say, are there significant contributions from the three major public clouds where Kubernetes runs? I would assume there is. They're probably nice about open source stuff, but it does remind me of another extensive conversation I had about with actually one of our coworkers at Configuration Management Camp, where I was trying to get down to what's the experience of installing Kubernetes. Because a lot of the discussion around Kubernetes stuff always assumes Kubernetes has been installed already, or that your IaaS has been laid down and is easy, or is up and running. But it seems you get in this area where I need a Kubernetes to install a Kubernetes, and then you got to install that first one. But it seemed like there were good solutions. But it was the old thing that my old friend Andrew Schaefer used to say: who installs the cloud? Who installs the installer, as it were, which is a little tedious to think about.
It can be.
Indeed. Which, that raises the last thing that I was going to highlight from it, and that is that there was an interesting conversation in the survey of what they called auxiliary workloads, which is sort of exactly what I was getting to, is that if you were to separate out Kubernetes usage into applications, so the actual software that people are using that are just running on Kubernetes, and then the stuff you run in Kubernetes that helps you build those applications. Like, for example, if you are running an internal developer platform like Backstage, which runs on Kubernetes, as I recall, or you're using your SBOM generation thing, which also runs on Kubernetes. There's all these things that people run on Kubernetes, as the survey was trying to metaphorize as an operating system. Counting that up, it looked like 63% of the workloads that people run on Kubernetes were the auxiliary ones. These ones that they use to support building and governing and maybe even managing the actual applications, whereas 37% of them were the actual applications. And again, in the summary, they didn't distinguish between production versus in staging and development, but whatever. It doesn't matter for this point. But it got me, one, that's an interesting observation, right? Because it is that's something I've been curious about, is running your support stuff in your target deployment environment. I guess you would probably remember this, Ben. You run your Java build tools usually in Java, but you don't necessarily run all of your development process in an app server. Or you could, I guess, but it's just usually a separate environment. Your runtime environment is sometimes separate in the Java world, or it used to be, or not. I don't know. There's almost it's hard to wrap my head around the same thing that I deploy to production is the thing that I run all my development stack on. But that appears to be the case in the Kubernetes world, I guess. Pause for commentary.
Yeah, I don't know. I can't. I've got to be honest. Not sure I follow exactly the train of thought there, but yeah, I do. Yes, I do remember working quite a lot on things like WebSphere and WebLogic and those sorts of application servers back in the day. And yes, everything build-wise, was all taken care of far away from production until you had this golden jar that you've been working on for months and months and months, and here it is boiled down into the golden jar. And then someone in the middle of the night had to tentatively apply that to production.
There you go. Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
But it was alone, it was this jar on its own. It didn't contain within it all the tests and all the other stuff that had gone on before that golden jar was produced. It was just the binary, just the one thing.
Totally. No, that's exactly it. You deconfused my monologue there. You figured it out. See?
The golden jar. We should. Yeah.
Yes.
Shame. The golden jar is no longer popular. You don't want a golden jar in your cupboard anymore.
And so this got me thinking about I have since retired from doing business strategy at companies I work at. I just talk about things. But I was thinking, if this is the case, then one way you could distinguish between you could try to differentiate as a Kubernetes vendor or service, someone selling Kubernetes basically, is you could do your pricing based on production versus development. Because I would assume, I don't know if this is the case, but there is a scenario that as someone who's selling running Kubernetes, you just charge for whatever it's used for. You don't care what type of workload is on it. You just meter that it's running and you charge for that. Versus you could say we're only going to charge you for production workloads. For development, it's all free. Do whatever you want, right? And then effectively, because there is, using this survey, let's round up the numbers we'll make them rounded. 40% of your workloads run in production, and then let's say 60% run in development, then you're only paying for 40% of your Kubernetes usage, which would be a big discount. But I don't know. I don't know what the public clouds do, but it seems like if you're a pure software vendor, it's just that's money you could have made, but you're not actually losing money because you don't have to pay for anything, right? Hence the great nature and margins on software. Whereas if you're actually someone running the Kubernetes, that's money that you are losing because you actually have to pay to run that stuff that you then are not recouping. But I don't know. Maybe everyone already does that. But that's we'll kick that over to the strategy groups who are thinking about these things.
Well, look, as you said, I'm a long-time Java Enterprise user from back in the day, and any discussion about pricing brings all those folks out in hives. Because we have to rely on Oracle for our pricing.
Yes, exactly. Well,
which usually means paying at some point, or cash paying, should we say? But they know how to monetize for real.
Yeah. Yep.
I was just looking, interestingly, I found a data point that agrees. So it's purely by chance, but that issue around sort of auxiliary applications, or whatever they termed it as, I was I remember seeing something similar to that recently and being either a bit surprised and also kind of not. A bit of me thinks 30% of your workloads are the actual stuff you care about, and another 63% are auxiliary. That's your sort of back end system stuff that you need to do to get that third running. And it was actually, who was this one? 451 Research had one, I couldn't tell you when, a month or two ago. And they came up with a very, very similar figure. So they had 65.2% in this year. They've got predictions going
so
forward.
Precise.
Internal operations. Well, exactly. I'm sure they counted every single one everywhere. But it ends up being a very similar figure of internal stuff versus customer facing, in their case, functions or data processing kind of stuff.
Huh. Well, you'll have to send that to me. I'll have to put it in my newsletter, available at newsletter.coté.io.
Yeah, I imagine it's a gated asset, but you never know. It might not be. It might be out there. But interesting that higher proportion. It reminds me, actually, I'll pimp your newsletter here, Coté, saying the whole Kubernetes experiment over 7 years, all this effort, all this engineering, all this complexity, and then a third of the stuff running on is actually what you want. Still undeniably a good idea, I'd say, but it's definitely food for thought, isn't it? How much engineering you have to put in just to run those 30% of apps you want.
Yeah. To get the the new infrastructure takes many years and sorting out. But yes, that if people are interested, they should go. This was an issue. I call them episodes. That's what I call them. But this was a write up I had last week where I was just. I think what happened. I read a Stephen O'Grady thing from 2016 where he was speculating about which way Paz is going to go. And it was, I was thinking oh yeah, well, the way it went was nowhere because we spent the last 7 years on Kubernetes and now we're ready to join the path back up. So there was my extended moping about that. But if you go check out my newsletter, you can read that. So thanks for bringing that up. That was great.
That was a good segue, wasn't it? There you go. I'm getting
But
better.
doesn't it make a lot of sense though? Because a lot of what we've been trying to do for years and years is reuse. You know, the idea of reuse. Let's reuse something because it's cheaper to reuse it than to keep reinventing the wheel, right? If we're running development workloads and auxiliary workloads on Kubernetes, we're just reusing Kubernetes, right? So
Yeah.
where's the big
Yeah.
deal? Because
I think I agree with you. It does make sense. It goes back to the champagne dogging fooding that we were talking about earlier. That like if your champagne flavored dog food if you're using it yourself in development, you're probably more likely to kind of understand production and make it work well there. So it's probably a good move.
That has a very different meaning in the UK, but we'll leave that there. Instead, let's turn our minds to a little bit later on in this survey, if I can, where it talks about the combination of data center and cloud architecture by organization size, right? So how big is your organization size? And then how have you sort of architected things? And no surprise here that in the smallest group, where the organization has maybe 1 to 100 employees, there's a small amount of hybrid cloud use, and there's a large amount of public cloud and public cloud only. So that's like the biggest group, if you like. I'm on public cloud and I only use public cloud is kind of like a big group. Whereas if you get to the 1,000 to 10,000 range, hybrid cloud is now 63%. So almost everybody has hybrid cloud in the 1,000 to more. Right, anyone more than 1,000. I find that interesting because I think back to a retailer example from the UK recently. This retailer came out and said, "Oh, we're going to put all of our workloads on one particular public cloud," and I was left thinking, like, why? Why would you do that these days? That's crazy. Because you've basically made a huge public statement that you're locked into one particular vendor. They know they've got you because, you know, you're not going to go back on your public statements very easily. And you've lost out on, you know, the ability to enter some competition into the pricing, to be able to, you know, move your workloads around to where they've got the better services. You know, maybe you want ChatGPT because it's on Microsoft, and maybe you want, you know, databases or on Google or whatever. The inability to be able to move around seems absolutely crazy to me. And then within a month or so, CTO's gone. So it's like, this is not, if you're not in the hybrid space over a certain size, you should be asking yourself, why not? I think. Because it doesn't make a lot of business sense to be exclusive to one particular public cloud vendor over a certain size. There's always going to be acquisitions. You're always going to be merging with other companies. You're never going to be able to control that the way that you think you can. And it reduces your choice. So why would you do that?
Yeah. No, that's a good case for realizing that you always have heterogeneous IT, or at least should be open to that. You know, if only because of, like you're saying, the acquisition thing, right? Like there's different. I was in like at one of these dinners I go to every now and then recently, and there were the two sides of that, where there was someone at a really big company, mostly European company, and they were saying they had moved all of their stuff to Google Cloud except desktop management, which sort of like, well, that makes sense, right? Like, you know, you got to have your, I forget what Microsoft's desktop management thing is called nowadays, but you know, that you just do that. And then there was someone else who said, oh, they were kind of like a conglomerate company. They acquired a lot of companies, and they said, yeah, every time we acquire a company, we basically just figure out if we leave them alone or if we move them to our thing, depending on how they're doing. And I don't know, somewhere. It seems like the larger the company, the more likely you sort of do both of those. Or not, who knows? Like, on the other hand, I was, while waiting for the long line of the delicious university Flemish food, like I was talking with some Dutch people about how, why do these companies keep doing things 60 different ways? and not just consolidate to best practices. But I think, Ben, you would advocate for, 5 at most different ways, not 60 different ways of doing it. But or whatever.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
But whatever you aim for is probably not what you end up with. So
Yeah, exactly. Well, I have my next meeting is starting up here, as you can hear. I'm getting kicked out of the room as they used
pressing
to say
deadlines
in the physical world. But I think as I always enjoy a survey. And the last thing that I'll go over, this is where, when it comes to technologies used, I should really go dig into the extended data. But it looks like Simon Wardley's dreams from 7 or 8 years ago that next year is going to be the year of serverless. It looks like it's increasing, because I think when you look at the technologies people use, in 2020, 30% of people reported using serverless/FAS, function as a service, and now it's up to 53%. So that is a huge growth amount for people using serverless stuff. So finally, those, which way does it go? I think a Wardley map, the good stuff is on the right side, if I remember. I forget which. I mean, here's a tip.
Right.
Here's a tip. At least in the Western world, the good stuff is always on the right in a chart. If you find yourself making a chart the other way, you're doing it wrong. You're going to confuse people. But maybe the right side of the Wardley charts will finally be cool. Although I guess that would be in the middle and the left, because his point would be these are commodity things that you should not worry about specializing in. That's serverless is kind of the bridge between. Serverless is kind of like his value line. Anyways, I should probably not speculate too much, because I haven't read his stuff in a long time. But serverless has gained in popularity in the Kubernetes world, it looks like.
Well, yeah, and our listener, Anchor, also prompts us to mention as well that WASM is mentioned in this survey too, isn't it? There's a definite sort of eye on the horizon at what technologies might come next, not only in the sort of serverless space, but generally in the sort of container space. And WASM is mentioned in this survey and seems to be maturing as a technology that could offer some new benefits after containers, or in a post-container world, I guess.
Now in true, I figured out this is as they say, our primary bit here in the Tanzu Talk news podcast. Does any of us actually know what that is?
The WASM stuff, I am getting increasingly intrigued by it, and I think I'll go off and do a little bit more digging on that. But yeah, I understand that, how the sort of container view of the world is that you share a kernel and you share certain things from the sort of Linux underpinnings, but then each container runs in its own secured sort of sandbox, if you like, where the actual code is. It's kind of like the next level up from that, where actually you don't need it. I don't think you need a kernel anymore, so you can start to get much slimmer, much faster startup times, and other sorts of benefits from that. But I'm speaking from a point of huge ignorance, so I need to go and have a deeper look at that. But it is very intriguing that it's coming up time and time again in more and more surveys as the technology to watch.
It sounds like unikernels, except comprehensible, which maybe that would be interesting.
I'm like Ben. I read a few articles on it, and it just has not sunk in what the difference is. In my head, I still think it's another redo of Java in a way, as in Java was that, write once, run anywhere, and that was the JVM and everything. And I read about WASM and it sounds the same, because I'm not a developer. And it just sounds like, well, we'll do, you can do away with Kubernetes. You won't need it. You'll run everything in WASM. Someone put out a good tweet, probably Kelsey, who knows, along those sort of lines, saying, it felt again like that Matrix thing of once you use it, you won't need to dodge bullets philosophy. But I'm amazed by those numbers, actually, that they're showing here of sort of 37% of organizations, I think, end user organizations, saying they have already deployed an application using WebAssembly. Whereas it feels just like a lot of chatter, but not much on the ground. And maybe that's not the case.
Well, they do say that, many are still testing the waters. So of that 37%, it might be one-offs, where someone's sort of trying something out and trying to get more familiar with the technology. And that makes a lot of sense. I think it is still very early days.
How do you deploy it? Anyone know? Is there a Docker desktop of WASM style thing that you say, I download this, I run it?
Docker desktop does now do WASM. Yeah, it was added in the last couple of months to Docker Desktop, so it is a possibility. You can do it that way.
I can join the 37% fairly quickly then.
And I think I can hear someone who's just deployed a WASM and it's not gone quite according to plan.
That's right. Yeah, very true. Well, did I go over my standard Debbie Downer thing about the demographics for the CNCF survey? I forget.
No, do your Debbie Downer. What's
well,
that?
to your point, Ed. Like I was like, the it looks like in the methodology, if you read through it, they've actually tried to get a wider representation of just people who would gleefully, respond to the newsletters and the Twitter account, which is, the primary way they recruit the people who answer these questions. But they also went out and scanned. They partner up with Dynatrace and Datadog to, as they say, get the anonymized data about what's running out there. And I think we covered the Dynatrace stuff last week. And so you do have that, you're kind of expanding beyond like the self-identifying CNCF community people. And it looks like they also used a third agency to recruit some people outside of their own thing. However, like it's always good to keep in mind that like even though Kubernetes has like definitely like mind share and people are interested in it, like to use a recent Gartner estimate, only 5% of terrestrial workloads run on Kubernetes, right? So there's still like of the people, all of the applications out there, there's still a very small amount running in Kubernetes. So to say that like 37% of of people using Kubernetes use any technology is still a very small thing, which is not to say it's bad. It's just like adds some context to it. But as been mentioned, I think we need to go debug a few deploys. We haven't figured that out yet. The alarms are going off there, and we've got to handle that stuff. So as always, this has been Tanzu Talk. If you want to get the show notes for this episode, see how to subscribe, all of that, you can go to tanzutalk.com, and we'll have some links to things we mentioned and other stuff. And with that, we'll see everyone next time. Bye-bye.
Bye all.
Bye-bye.
All right. Well, there is a question about, do you see someone asking? Well,
Nightwave. Hello. Thanks for listening. You're asking about how do you sort of build and deploy the Tanzu application platform? And so you get your Kubernetes from whichever vendor or way that you prefer to do that. Any way you prefer to do that. There are certain versions of Kubernetes that it's certified against. And then you layer your Tanzu application platform on top. The way that that's done at the minute is through the documentation. So you'd read the documentation and make a few changes based on whichever choices you'd made around your vendor of choice for your Kubernetes platform. But a lot of that can be scripted as well. So if you don't want to repeat the exercise, then it's a good idea to sort of script it out for your sort of customizations. And that's how you would deliver it. A lot of scripting, a lot of reapplying stuff that you've done before to maintain it.
All right. Well, hopefully that's a sufficient answer to lead to more questions and answers. That sounds good.
I hope that helped.
All right. Well, thanks for watching this on the stream or the replay. And, you should also, if you're only doing it here, you should definitely subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss out on all of our great content on a more or less weekly basis at tanzutalk.com. Or just search for Tanzu Talk in your podcast thing. And chances are we're the only podcast called that. We'll see if that's not the case otherwise. So goodbye to people watching the video.